So I usually start out the EML course the same every year by talking about the Buddha's biography. So I'll do that again, yeah, because I think his biography is a model of how to live, you know. The early part of his life when he was in the palace is, even though it was 2,500 years ago, there's some things that were very similar to our lives. And then what he did after he renounced the kingdom and went off, is an example for us. Yeah. So he may have renounced a kingdom, we renounce our 401k, our career, our, those kinds of things, but very similar. Okay. Let's start with the praise to the Buddha and then the mandala offering. We do the mandala offering at the beginning of teachings. The mandala here represents the world, our particular universe. It's not the mandala of a deity. And we're imagining it as a pure land and thinking of our own world, how we construct our world, what is valuable to us, what we consider beautiful. And we think of offering all of that to the Buddha, Dharma, Sangha as we request to hear teachings. Yeah, the meaning being that we don't just kind of walk in, stamp our feet, and say, "Yeah, teach me, I'm interested." But there's a whole process of, of showing respect and seeing that the Dharma teachings are more precious than any material object that we could ever come in contact with or do anything with. Yeah. So we're offering the whole universe and everything beautiful and valuable in it to request the Dharma teachings because they are more valuable than all of that stuff. Yeah, somebody gives you the universe, what are you going to do with it? Yeah. Say, oh, now I'm a monarch of the universe. Yeah, you think that's going to be fun? Yeah, do you want to be monarch of something? Yeah, maybe you want to be Kate and William. What do you think? Yeah, do you think that those people have nice lives? Yeah, you want to be Donnie and Melania? No, really? Yeah. I mean, just the people that, are supposed to be famous and important and doing things in society, really think, would you want to have their lives? Yeah, would you really want to be Beyonce? Or some, what is it, Michael Jordan? Or, somebody like that. Yeah. When you're young, when you're little kids, it's like, oh yeah, they're the best and they're famous. I want to be like that. Yeah. But when you think about their lives, I don't know. Yeah. Being in the press all the time, having your whole private life out in the newspapers with everybody people who don't even know you commenting about your private life. And now that there's AI, who knows what they're showing about your private life on the internet. Yeah. Anyway, Yeah, the point is here, we offer the mandala really, yeah, as a way uh, to show to ourselves what is important. Yeah, and that we're willing to give that for the teachings. Because what's going to make you happier in the long term? Yeah, being monarch of the universe or having Dharma teachings in the long term. Yeah, you have any kind of high social position that is going to last, maybe as long as your life, but maybe you'll get kicked out before or overthrown before. But definitely not your next life. Yeah. Whereas if we practice the Buddha's teachings and take some of the imprints and the habits established from that into future lives, that will really serve us well. Yeah. So what we're getting at here too is when we come into Buddhism, we go through this process of reorienting our priorities. Yeah. And so all of you have come for exploring monastic life. Yeah. And so a lot of what you're going to hear during the course is about setting priorities. And the priorities, it may not be verbalized as that, but that's part of what you're going to be thinking about and examining. And, depending on how you were brought up, if you were brought up in the usual way in this world, the Buddha's priorities and worldly priorities, there's a lot of difference in them. Yeah. And so to really think about those and, for us personally, what is important in our life? Yeah. What is important? Yeah. Because when when you're little, what's important? Yeah. Making mom and dad happy, or grandma and grandpa, or whoever is bringing you up. Yeah. That's what's important. Then you get older. Yeah. And what's important? Sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Yeah. Then you get a little bit older, and it's still sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And you get a little bit older, and it's still sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Okay. Maybe in there, it goes sex, alcohol, and a corner office. Okay. Yeah. So just, replacing one thing for the other. But, all those things have something in common. They're what society held up as being meaningful. And they only last for a certain period of time, but not very long. And what you have to do to get them, and what you have to do once you've got them to make sure you keep them, that's a whole other story. Yeah. Because we usually think, okay, I want to become this, or I want to achieve that. Yeah. And then what are you going to do the next day? Yeah. People sometimes feel this way about ordination. They have what I call ordination fever. They want to get ordained right away, immediately. Yeah, yesterday. and then I say, yeah, okay, what are you going to do the next day? Eat, sleep, read a book. It's too goal oriented and not enough process oriented, and not really thinking about, once you want certain things, but what are you going to do after you get them? Yeah. And we very seldom think about that. It's usually, I want to meet, what is it? My soulmate. Yeah. And have the perfect relationship. And, be a combination of what is it? Cinderella and Sleeping Beauty and Superman. And, all those things are all kind of mixed together. The perfect thing, yeah. And then you have this big wedding and they, write about it in the New York Times. And what are you going to do the next day? Yeah. You were just, king or queen for the day, and everybody was going, oh, wow, you're so beautiful. Yeah. And then what? Yeah. So we very seldom really stop and think about, well, what is important in my life in the long term? Yeah. Not just getting something because it's sparkly in one way or another, but yeah, but really thinking what is important, what will serve me for the rest of my life, and what will help me make my life meaningful. Yeah, and what is a meaningful life? I was very pleased the last couple of years I was asked to speak at Yale. They have a course called A Life Worth Meaning. Or no, A Life Worth Living. Yeah. I don't like that title because it implies a life not worth living, but as if, it's okay to kill people who we consider useless. So I think I told them they should retitle it as A Meaningful Life. Yeah, but I'm not chancellor of the university, so they don't listen to me. Yeah. Okay, but to really think, what is a meaningful life? Yeah. And when I die, which we don't know when that's going to be, yeah, when I look back at my life, what will I be pleased about having done? And what will I regret? Yeah. And if there's things you regret, then it's good to stop doing them now if you can. Yeah. Instead of, but I really enjoy it. Can't I do it longer? Well, can you? Yeah, you can give yourself permission. You can do whatever you want. Yeah, but what's going to be the result? Okay, so that's another thing you're going to be thinking about during the course of, not only what are your priorities and what is a meaningful life, but what are the causes, to bring about your priorities, and what are the causes of having a meaningful life? Yeah. And to really think about that, to think about causality. And yeah, because if we're in tune with creating the causes, then slowly, we can, make our life meaningful and bring about the results that we want. But if we don't think about causes, then we're just grasping at straws. Mm-hmm. So you'll find all through Buddhist teachings causality, yeah, dependent arising. Things don't come out of nowhere. Yeah, they have causes. Okay, so maybe now we should do the chanting. I sometimes give long introductions, don't I? Yeah. And sometimes no introductions. Okay, so like yesterday, we imagine in the space in front of us, the Buddha is surrounded by all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas and Arhats and holy beings from all the Buddhist traditions. And ourselves surrounded by all sentient beings. And we're leading them in taking refuge and generating bodhicitta.
To the teacher endowed, transcendent destroyer, one thus gone, full destroyer, completely and fully awakened one, perfect in knowledge and good conduct, one gone to bliss, knower of the world, supreme guide of beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and humans, to you the Buddha endowed, transcendent destroyer, glorious conqueror, Shakyamuni, I prostrate, make offerings and go for refuge. When I was sitting among humans, you were born on this earth, you paced 7 strides and said, I am supreme in this world. To you who are wise, then I bow. With your body's form supremely fine, wisdom motion like a golden mountain. Fame that blazes in the 3 worlds, winner of the best, supreme guide, to you I bow. With the supreme sun's face like a spotless moon, color like gold, to you I bow. You are immaculate, the 3 worlds are not, incomparable wise one, to you I bow. Great, compassionate protector, all-knowing teacher, field of merit and good qualities, vast as an ocean, to this Tathagata I bow. Through purity, freeing from attachment, through virtue, freeing from the lower realms. Unique, supreme, ultimate reality, to the Dharma that is peace I bow. Having freed themselves, showing the path to freedom too, well established in the trainings. The holy field endowed with good qualities, to the Sangha I bow. Do not commit any non-virtuous actions, perform only perfect virtuous actions. Subdue your mind completely, this is the teaching of the Buddha. A star, a mirage, a flame of a lamp, an illusion, a drop of dew, a bubble. A dream, a flash of lightning, a cloud, see conditioned things as such. Through this merit may sentient beings attain the state of all seeing, subdue the 4 faults, and be delivered from the ocean of psychic existence perturbed by the waves of aging, sickness, and death. This ground anointed with perfume, flowers strewn Mount Meru, 4 lands, sun and moon, imagined as a wooden land and offered to you. May all beings enjoy this pure land. Venerable holy gurus, in the space of your truth body, from billowing clouds of your wisdom and love, let fall the rain of the profound and extensive Dharma, in whatever form is suitable for subduing sentient beings. Idam Gurana Mandalakam Niriyatayami.
I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. Path the merit I create by listening to the Dharma. I will attain Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Okay, so a couple of minutes of silence. Let your mind settle. And let's generate our motivation and think that we are here to learn the Buddhist teachings because we want to make our lives meaningful, and especially meaningful in terms of practicing the path, going towards awakening, and meaningful in terms of broadening our heart and our mind so that we can help other living beings in whatever way they need to be helped at any particular time, and especially helping them by showing them the path. And so we're interested in monastic life as a vehicle to help us do that. But it's within the broader perspective of becoming fully awakened so that we can have the wisdom, compassion, and skillful means to really be of significant benefit to all living beings. So cultivate that long term motivation. And just before I start with the Buddhist life, some of you may wonder why we do a lot of chanting and why there's rituals, bowing, offering food, all this kind of stuff. Some people like rituals and some people are kind of like, yeah, what's this all about? Yeah. So approach the rituals with curiosity. Approach the prayers with, the chanting, the recitations with curiosity. The reason that we chant things together is to pay attention to the meaning of what we're saying, because the previous masters recognized that sometimes we don't really know very well how to direct our mind in virtue. So they wrote these different recitations, the idea being when we recite them or when we read them, we think about the meaning and that helps us direct our mind in a virtuous way. Yeah. But of course, we have to have some familiarity before we even think, why do I want to direct my mind in that way? Yeah. I know when I first encountered Buddhism, I didn't know anything about it. And, all these people were bowing. In the culture I grew up in, the only thing you bowed to was your credit card. Yeah. So all these people bowing and the white scarves, the katas like we did last night. And it's like, what is all of this? Yeah. It's so strange. This isn't the culture I grew up in. Well, actually, that's good. Yeah. Yeah. Why should everything be the culture I grew up in? Life is much more interesting when you learn from other people's culture. Yeah. So I was, quite skeptical at first, and especially about the bowing part, because that to me was so weird. But once I learned why we bow, and when I looked at my mind and I saw, oh yeah, that would help me. This practice of seeing the good qualities in others and respecting those qualities, that would help me. So then I started doing that, yeah. But it was based on, really learning what it was about and why. Yeah. So feel free to ask questions. Yeah, we're a pretty diverse group just looking at the applications. Some of you have been to the Abbey before, most of you haven't. Some of you have trained or know something about Tibetan Buddhism. Some of you have been practicing Theravada or Chan or I don't know what. Yeah. We're from many different cultures and many different countries. And personally speaking, I think that kind of mix is very fertile for helping us open our minds and our hearts and learning about sentient beings and learning about ourselves. Yeah. So, yeah. Okay. So, the Buddha's life. The Buddha, well, they usually say he was born as a prince, but actually at that time in India, it wasn't so much um, kingdoms at that time, although it's written like that. It was more like the start of republics, you know. And so the Buddha's father, well, he wasn't the Buddha the way the story is usually told. Siddhartha's father was the chief, yeah, the big guy. And so we'll call him the king, but he wasn't really, Um, he was the leader, the chief person in that republic. Um, so, of course, when he had a child, he wanted his child to follow in his footsteps. Yeah. And like most of our parents, they have our whole life planned out for us when we're this big. Yeah. Because they see this little baby and they love it and they want, everything, their baby to have everything in the world that will make them happy. And, you know, and so the parents want their kids to follow in their footsteps, to have, same career, if not the same career, at least something similar, to make a good living, have welfare, to get married and produce progeny, and, all of this. Would you agree? Do your parents have certain expectations or dreams? Yeah, yeah. How many of you feel like you fulfill your parents' expectation or dream of what you should be? Does anybody feel, really? You became like your parents wanted you? You're the first person I know. Most of us have not become what our parents, exactly the kind of life that our parents had in mind for us. Yeah. But, parents start that out because they want us to have the best. Yeah. And the best is according to their version of best, which may or may not be our version of best. Okay? So, the Buddha was, the Siddhartha was, first of all, his mother died a week after he was born. Yeah. But the families at that time were very closely knit. And so his mother's sister was the one who raised him. So he had all the pleasures in the whole kingdom, everything that, he could wish for. They made sure that he had that. Very, very sheltered life. Yeah. So, that would be comparable to, in this life, not being able to walk to school on your own because your parents were afraid you'd get kidnapped, or, things like that. Very sheltered. And it was arranged, for him to, he could pick his wife, and, of course, she had to be of noble, heredity. And they got married, and they had a child. And so everything looks hunky-dory, okay? Actually, when he was first born, a soothsayer came and said to the king and queen that your son can either become a great spiritual leader or a great political leader, a great king. So, of course, the king wanted his son to become a great king. Yeah. But anyway, that's not how it turned out. Yeah. So he was raised in that way. Everything you can else, comparable to today's, you had, 15 tablets and countless things of Lego and Barbie dolls galore, and you joined Little League and what else? Football, you do football, and yeah, everything, okay? And you were a star in everything. Yeah, because Buddha was, he starred in everything. Yeah, well, he was the son of the king. He didn't have a choice. He needed to be the big shot. Yeah, okay. But he was very curious. And so at one point, in the evening, they would always have singing and dancing and entertainment. But he really noticed at the end of the evening, all the dancing girls would just fall asleep on on the floor, you know, and they're all, how when you're asleep, your mouth is open and you snore and you drool a little bit. Yeah. So here are all these beautiful dancing girls who are now just, sacked out on the floor, snoring and drooling and farting and everything. And the prince is going, what's going, huh? What's happening? So he arranged with his charioteer, which was a good friend. And what did he do? He snuck out of the palace. Yeah. And had his charioteer take him into town. So this is like how we used to tell our parents, oh, I'm going over to, Johnny's family's house when you're really going out to smoke some dope or going to the bar or something else. The thing yeah, you did what your parents didn't want you to do, and you didn't tell them, okay, and you just hoped you didn't get caught. So he snuck out, and the first time he went to town, he was very curious, and he saw. What did he see the first time? He saw an old man, right? Yeah. And so he saw somebody who was old, with a cane, kind of hobbling along, bent over. And he said to his charioteer, what's that? And the charioteer explained, oh, this is an old person. What? How did he get that way? And charioteer explained, well, that is going to happen to all of us. Yeah. So the prince was really shocked. He had never been to an old folks' home, never been a candy striper in the hospital or anything like that. So he was totally shocked. But it made him think, oh, someday I'm going to look like that. Someday my wife is going to look like all these dancing girls are going to look like that. Okay, so he went back to the palace. Then a second time he went out. This time he saw somebody who was sick. Yeah, just somebody in incredible pain, sick, lying, rolling around, not able to do anything because they were so sick. Yeah. And again, he had never seen that before. So he asked his charioteer, who explained, oh, that's a sick person. What's that? Well, sometimes our bodies are not always healthy. They're not always in good shape. Huh? Yeah. And the charioteer said, you just wait and you'll get sick too. This is part of our human condition. Okay. So he went back to the kingdom. He thought about that some more. Aging, sickness. Third time he went out, he saw a corpse. Yeah. The corpse was not a forest lawn, nicely embalmed. Yeah. The corpse was just a dead body. Yeah. Lying there. Maybe there were some dogs eating at the flesh or some birds, vultures pecking at the flesh. And again, the prince was so perplexed. And the charioteer had to say, that's a dead person. What's that? Well, he stopped breathing. He isn't alive anymore. Huh? Well, that's going to happen to all of us, the charioteer explained. And this was like, oh my God, aging, sickness, death. And it's going to happen to all of us. There's no way about it. So he went back to the palace, thinking about this and thinking, I wonder if there's a way out of this. So the next time he went out, the fourth time, he saw a renunciate. At the time of the Buddha, that was, how spiritual people lived. Very simple clothing with an alms bowl and, camped out, no palaces, nothing like that. And he was perplexed. What's this guy walking around in rag clothing, And again, the charioteer explained, oh, that's a wandering mendicant. How come he's dressed like that? Yeah. How come he doesn't have any hair? How come, he's a little bit dirty and smelly? Well, they live simple lives. They don't care about those kinds of things. They're trying to get off the wheel of life, this circle of reincarnation. Yeah. So he went back to the palace and, oh, okay, there is a way out. I don't know what it is, but that renunciate shows that there's some people who are looking for what that is. So, yeah. So then he kept thinking about this, and he decided to leave the palace and adopt that lifestyle so that he could find out the meaning of life and get off the cycle of rebirth. So again, he snuck out with his charioteer, and you'll see pictures of this where he had a sword-like thing and cut off his hair, because he had long hair, cut off his hair, took off the jewelry, the earrings. That's why when you see pictures of the Buddha, his ears are long, because as a prince, he was wearing jewelry that was quite heavy, that stretched out his ears. He took the jewelry off, took off his royal clothing and put on rags and picked up a bowl and started going, became a wandering mendicant. Okay, the charioteer went back to the palace without the prince. How do you think mom and dad reacted? What happened to him? Yeah, did somebody kidnap him? Did he run away from home? What in the world does he want out of life? We've given him everything. Why wasn't this good enough for him? How come he can't be a good boy and just stay home and do what the rest of us are doing? Yeah, I'm sure you could probably write the script, of what, you can imagine parents saying, who do you think you are after everything we've done for you? You had these beautiful clothes and you threw them by the side of the road. Do you know how much they cost? And how hard we worked to get them for you? You don't appreciate anything. You're a brat. What did I do to deserve a child like you? Okay? So his parents were freaked out. Meanwhile, he went off and he was looking for a teacher because he knew he needed guidance. So the first teacher he met had actualized a certain level of concentration. I forget exactly what it was. And so he taught Siddhartha all those methods of how to meditate and develop single-pointed concentration. And Siddhartha practiced them. He attained all those states, and so well that his teacher said, I'm willing to step aside and you can lead the group now. But he said no, he didn't want that, because he knew he still hadn't attained liberation. He knew that he still had the afflictions, the defilements in his mind. So he left that teacher very respectfully, and he went and studied with the second teacher. So that teacher had actualized methods of concentration, even higher than the first one. He taught those to Siddhartha. Siddhartha practiced them, attained them. That teacher, too, was saying, you have the same attainments as me. You can take over the group if you want. And he again said no, because he knew that no matter how high his state of concentration was, concentration alone does not cut the root of samsara. Yeah, that wisdom is needed to overcome the afflictions, to purify the mind of all defilements, not just concentration. So he left that teacher too, again respectfully, and continued wandering. So at one point he met up with 5 other wanderers, yeah, kind of like how we meet up with friends. So they were all going off. They were ascetics, yeah, that was something very popular at the time of the Buddha. So they went off to a place. How many of you have been to Bodh Gaya? Yeah, a number of you. Okay, so there's a dry riverbed where there used to be a river, and it was on the other side of that. And so the 6 of them, his 5 friends and him, meditated for 6 years doing ascetic practices. So he ate 1 grain of sand a day. Oh, 1 grain of rice. Sorry. I didn't want it to be too brutal. Yeah, 1 grain of rice a day. Yeah. And he became so thin, you may have seen statues of the Buddha sitting in meditation, completely, ribs and gaunt and, very thin. Okay, so he became thin like that. He was weak, yeah, but this was their practice. He did that for 6 years because the prevalent feeling among the wandering ascetics at that time was that if you lived an ascetic life, yeah, then that would help you break attachment to the body. Yeah, so, no finery, not much food, sleeping on the cold earth. Yeah, all of that kind of stuff was designed supposedly to break attachment to the body. Well, what Siddhartha discovered, yeah, was that didn't work to break attachment to the body. So just as the previous teachers had taught him high states of concentration, but that wasn't sufficient for awakening, here his ascetic friends torturing the body, no, that's not going to get you to awakening either. So he left his friends, and they're going, oh, you cop out, you softy. We've been doing this practice. You just want to go have hot fudge sundaes. Oh, get out of here. We don't want to see you and talk to you because you're just, you're too soft. You're not up to this practice we're doing. So he left. Yeah. And he crossed, he sat down beneath a tree to meditate. And one woman came, and she had brought an offering because in her village, that tree had a spirit. So she wanted to make offerings to the tree spirit. But here was this Siddhartha was sitting under the tree, and she thought he was the tree spirit. Anyway, she had prepared this thing of rice with milk and raisins. And if you've ever been to the Tibetans, when they have a big ceremony, this is what they serve, in the break time. Yeah, because this is what the Buddha got when he left his ascetic practice. So he ate the food, and it was like, oh, wow, I have a lot of energy now. he started taking care of his body instead of torturing it. He began to eat properly. Yeah, he took his vitamins, he took his supplements. Yeah, he didn't have cake with purple frosting. He didn't, eat chips. Yeah, or coffee. Yeah. So he started eating and he discovered, oh, I have a lot of energy now. So he crossed the river there. There's always this thing, the crossing the river is symbolic. And he went into, this place that is now called Bodhgaya, but it wasn't at that time. And he sat under a Bodhi tree. And he said, I'm not getting up until I've attained full awakening. So he sat there and meditated. Yeah? So what happens in the meditation? Well, first of all, he gets angry. Yeah? And it's like he thinks, when I was young, this other prince didn't treat me properly and my parents scolded me and everything's not fair in my life. I am traumatized. Yeah. And, and all of this anger, kind of manifested around him as these scary things, goblins and soldiers and, ice agents who are masked and they're coming out to get you. And he's sitting there meditating and this thing is going on around him. Yeah, they say it's Mara. Yeah, Mara is kind of like what is Mara like? Mara is like somebody who torments you. Yeah, yeah. So, and pushes your buttons and tests you. Yeah, tests you. So this is all going on. So what did he do? How did he deal with his anger that was manifesting as all these things coming after him? He meditated on love, and all these scary things became flower petals that then rained down on top of him. So they all disappeared because he meditated on love. Okay, so he continued meditating. Then what happens? Well, the hatred didn't, that didn't get him. Let's try attachment. So what comes up in his meditation? All these beautiful women, it's like, and they all have the latest clothes, which is no clothes at all, wear as little as possible. And they all appear just all around, and trying to seduce him. And he kind of goes, listen, that's not what my life's about. And so he turned them all into hags, and they all slunk away. Yeah. So Mara tried to, use anger to get him away from his practice, failed. Tried to use clinging, attachment, and craving, failed. Okay. So he continued to meditate. And then at dawn, yeah, he attained full awakening because at that point he had joined the wisdom realizing the ultimate nature with his concentration, and motivated by the bodhicitta to benefit sentient beings, then he was able to purify his mind of all afflictions and hindrances. Okay. Now, did he just sit there afterwards? Okay, I'm a Buddha. Been there, done that, got the t-shirt. What else is next? What am I going to do now? And he thought, nobody's going to understand what I just realized. Yeah, this world with everybody running around like chickens without their heads, they're not going to understand what I realized. So he just did walking meditation and left it at that. And then Brahma, Indra, Shiva, the various Hindu gods, came and they bowed in front of him and they said, there are some beings with little dirt in their eye. Yeah, you need to teach. Yeah, and they requested him to please teach what he had realized for the sake of living beings so that they could attain liberation and full awakening. Okay, so who's he going to teach? Yeah, this is hard stuff. Who's going to understand? He thought, my 5 friends, my 5 ascetic friends. So he saw with his clairvoyant powers that they were outside Benares, in a little town called Sarnath. So he started walking there, and he started walking. And on the road, one layman saw him and thought, wow, this guy's special, and started talking to him. And that layman became his very first disciple. But he kept walking, and he got to Sarnath. He saw where his 5 friends were. His 5 friends looked and saw him coming, and they said, ignore this guy. He was the softy who left, who, just doesn't have what it takes to be a good meditator. So they weren't going to offer him a seat. They weren't going to give him any water, nothing. Well, by this time he's the Buddha. So he's walking there, and as he's walking, I guess he has a certain, what you could call, vibe. Yeah. And as he approached, his friends automatically began preparing a seat for him, getting him some water to drink, and so on. Okay. So he came, they greeted him after they had said they weren't going to, but, he had a strong vibe. And he sat down and they started talking and they wanted to know, well, what have you been up to? Yeah, you're different than you were before. And so he started to explain the path. Yeah. One of the disciples who was listening attained stream entry, the first level of the realization of emptiness, according to one way of explaining the path. Anyway, they became his first 5 disciples. And at that time, the way of ordination was very simple. The Buddha just said, come, O bhikshu. And that was your ordination ceremony. Okay? So they became his followers like that. And at the very beginning, that's how people were ordained, because it was all through Shakyamuni Buddha, and he just said, come, O bhikshu. At the beginning, there weren't women who were ordained, because in ancient Indian society, women were super protected, okay? When they were young, it was their father who looked over them and gave them permission and all this stuff. When they got older and they married, then it was their husband who took over, And then after the husband got old, it was her son, not her daughter, but her son, who took over and told her what to do and took care of her and everything. Extremely patriarchal society. The Buddha was actually, he didn't conform to this. Yeah. He started out conforming because that was the way it was in the society. But after 12 years, of being a Buddha, and by this time there were a lot of monks, men who had ordained, he went back to his town, to Kapilavastu, and he taught his father and the royal family and all the people in the town there to repay their kindness. And his stepmother, who raised him, who was also his aunt, she was very interested in Dharma. All the women were very interested in the Dharma. They went and asked to listen to teachings, so I think they sat way in the back. After the Buddha left, followed by all of his monks, the women there put on, they had asked him, about ordination, and he said, don't ask. Yeah. But he left with the monks, okay? And so what they did is they shaved their head, took off their jewelry. These are royal women, put on rag robes, and we had the first women's march. Yeah, the first women's march in history. And they walked from Kapilavastu all the way to Vaisali, because that's where the Buddha and his monks were going. Yeah. And they got there, the Buddha and the monks had arrived, a few days before. And Mahaprajapati, his stepmother, his aunt, went to Ananda, who was the Buddha's attendant, and said, we would like to request. She went with 500 women. Yeah, it wasn't a small women's march, it was a big one. And they walked barefoot the whole way. Okay. So, and they didn't wear little pink pussycat hats. Yeah, you remember those? Yeah. So it was a different kind of march. So they got there and they talked to Ananda, Venerable Ananda, the bhikkhus, the Buddha's attendant, and said, we would like to request ordination. And they were dressed already and hair shaved and everything. So Ananda, conveyed the request, and the Buddha said, don't ask. Yeah. And so this happened a few times where they requested and the Buddha responded, don't ask. I think because at that time in that society, to have women who were wanderers, no other group did that. And the women were so protected that if they were out in public without a male chaperone, people thought that they were either criminals or prostitutes. Yeah. So he turned them down. They kept requesting. At one point, Ananda, when he conveyed the request, asked the Buddha, well, can they attain awakening? And the Buddha said, yes. And so Ananda said, well, why not let them ordain? And so theoretically, as the story goes, then the Buddha said, well, it would lead to degeneration, And I think what he was thinking about was you have male and female renunciates, and what's going to happen? They fall and they get attracted to each other, and then they leave the path and go off, and But Ananda kept at it, and eventually the Buddha said, okay. And so he ordained Mahaprajapati, And then the 500 women also received ordination. So that's the way you have the two orders of bhikshus and bhikshunis. Then there were some children who wanted to ordain, okay, including the Buddha's son. He had a child. But when the children ordained, they cried at night. They miss mommy and daddy. And they were hungry because the ascetics didn't eat in the evening. And, they wanted their teddy bears and so on. So the Buddha saw, that they couldn't really keep couldn't practice as the fully ordained bhikshus did. So he created this other level of ordination called Shramanera, okay, for men, Shramaneri, or Shramanarika for women, okay? And you had to be at least 20 years old to become a bhikshu or a bhikshuni, but at least old enough to scare away a crow. Yeah, that was the demarcation line. About 8 years old, but nobody knew how old they were. They didn't have a central authority with, birth certificates. They didn't take your feet and get your footprint and fingerprints and whack you on the bottom as soon as you were born. Yeah, so kind of approximately 8 years old. So that started that novice level of ordination. Okay. And then we don't really know why, but he also started a level of ordination called shikshamana for women. And they said it's a 2-year training period, between Shramaneri and Bhikshuni. And they say, well, he started it to make sure that the women weren't pregnant. Yeah, because that would be kind of embarrassing because, everybody was supposed to be celibate. And, if you ordained a woman and she was pregnant, that wouldn't go over too big. So, but 2 years to decide if somebody was pregnant, I don't know. So anyway, this is kind of, I can't explain it. Anyway, so there was that ordination that was set up. That one's called shikshamana. It's a nun in training. Okay, so then, what does the Buddha do? Is he has to teach the Dharma. And in those days, the teachers, they traveled like today, except not on planes and not on trains, and you didn't have to buy a ticket, and the sponsoring people didn't have to pay $1,000 or so for your ticket or whatever it was. No, because those days you walked, okay? And so they were wandering mendicants. This was their way of life. And when they reached different villages, they would give teachings. People would give them alms. They didn't beg. Sometimes it's said that they begged. They did not beg. They did not ask for the food. They would go into town with their bowl and stand there in front of a house. And if they wanted to give the wandering mendicants food, they would give them food. If they didn't, then they would go on to the next house. So that's how they lived their life. But whenever they received food, of course, they were very grateful. And so then they taught the Dharma. And so in this way, the Buddha came to have a lot of disciples as he went from one village to the next. Then what happened is there's so many disciples, and people from other locations further away hear about it. And so the Buddha said to some of his senior disciples, go out and for the benefit of all beings teach. And so you had people, going throughout all the different parts of India. Some went down to Sri Lanka, some went into Southeast Asia, some went over the Karakoram Mountains, or followed the Silk Road and went to China. And so, people started spreading out, and Buddhism began spreading, and it became one of the world's major religions. As it spread, okay, let me back up a little bit here. So whenever the Buddha taught, there was, who was it? It was it was Ananda who memorized what the Buddha had said. He had that kind of mind that remembered everything. So he remembered what the Buddha said. Then, so that way the teachings were getting preserved orally as an oral tradition. Then, how did, he was having all these bhikshus and bhikshunis, how did the precepts happen? Well, it wasn't like he said, okay, I'm starting a religion and now I got to lay out all the rules. Okay? It wasn't like that. He just assumed everybody was sincere and everybody would practice well. Well, they're ordinary beings. And so sometimes it started out with the monks. They would do things that weren't so cool. So all of the precepts that we have today came about because of people making mistakes, and doing things that were either immoral, unethical, or things that were just inconsiderate and either annoyed the other monastics or annoyed the lay people. And whenever somebody did something like that, they would tell the bhikshus, and the bhikshus would go to the Buddha and say, we heard so-and-so did this and that, and the Buddha would call that person and he would say, did you do that? And the guy said, yes. And then he would admonish him and tell him why that behavior was not considerate of other people, and not the kind of behavior that, if you're sincerely aspiring for liberation, that isn't the kind of behavior that you would have. And so that's how, and then he would say, from now on, for the good of the monastics, I establish these precepts. So we call them precepts. Not sometimes you see it translated as vows, but we usually say precepts. And so all of the precepts came about because of actual situations in which people were just behaving like jerks. Excuse me, with all reference to the Sangha. They said that there were 6 naughty monks that are responsible for the precepts that came from the monks, and 6 naughty nuns, okay? And if you think that people do nutty things now, some of the things they did was really nutty, okay? They had all kinds of people who had that aspiration and meant well, but were out to lunch, in terms of differentiating what is virtue and what isn't, and what is considerate behavior for the people you live with, and what's considerate behavior for the people who give you food. They were, So they did all these things, and it was after any kind of situation that a precept got made. Okay, and so Upali, one of the monks, he was the one who memorized all of that. And the question, then when the Buddha was going around teaching in all these different places, and and then after he passed away, then Mahakassapa, one of his senior disciples, said, we got to have a conference, okay? And everybody's got to go to Rajgir, and we're going to have a conference and review what the Buddha taught us and really memorize it, have everybody be memorizing the same thing to preserve the tradition, because writing wasn't in common practice, in common use at those days. So they called a conference and they had this. And so that, it was an oral tradition passed down. The Vinaya was all the regulations for the monks and nuns, the bhikshus and the bhikshunis. And then the sutra became the sutra teachings. The sutras were the discourses, the teachings that the Buddha gave in all these different places where he went. Yeah. And so Ananda recited those. So they often talk of the three baskets of teachings, the Vinaya, the Sutra, so those are those first two, and the Abhidharma. Okay. So the first two, the Vinaya and the Sutra, really go back to the Buddha. The Abhidharma, there's the different Buddhist traditions have different ideas about the evolution of the Abhidharma. One thought is that the Buddha, during one summer, went up to one of the god realms where his mother had been reborn and taught her the Abhidharma. And that when he came back to earth, you'll see paintings of the Buddha walking down a golden ladder. Well, this is the story. He came down from the heavens. I don't think he walked down on a golden ladder. I'm sure they must have had a plane for him. No, I think it's probably different too. But, he got down. And this is the source of one of the four great holidays in the Buddhist calendar. It's usually in the autumn sometime, late autumn. Okay. So that's one theory about the Abhidharma teachings. There's several others, okay? But the point is that the teachings, were an oral tradition, and they were passed down from one teacher to their disciple, and then that person became a teacher and passed it down. And so everything's been passed down orally. And then at a certain point, usually about the 1st century AD, maybe 1st century BC, it's really unclear, then they started writing things down, okay? But as the teachings spread to different places in the world, what you had was the evolution of different Buddhist traditions, and different ways of living the monastic life. And so this happened because of the difference in climate, the difference in culture, the difference in economic systems, all sorts of differences when, Buddha, the Dharma started to spread all over Asia. And so what we have today in our tradition are what has been passed down from those early traditions. Initially, it was all oral, okay? Then, and the teachings went all over the place. And then what became, what started is around the 5th century AD, they started writing down the teachings that had gone to Sri Lanka. And no, they started writing it, they started writing it down a little bit earlier. Okay. Maybe. Well, in China, they started doing it around the 1st century, so probably somewhere around there in Sri Lanka too. So so you had things being written down, yeah, and you had the evolution of different traditions, because some of the people who taught, they preferred one sutra over another, or one approach to the Dharma over another, yeah. And so, yeah, you had the development of different meditation techniques. Yeah, the different development of the robes. You know, we have the Sangha and the different tradition, but our robes look different. How we keep the precepts is different. Sometimes the precepts in the different places are pretty similar. Um, for those who have the ordained tradition, but there's some differences in them too. But then politics also started influencing the way the Sangha lived from the very beginning. Yeah. And so, for example, when Buddhism went to China, um, well, first of all, in India, they were wearing kind of saffron colored clothes, and there's many different shades of saffron. And they were wearing that because they thought that was an ugly color. And if you're an ascetic, you're renounced, you're not trying to look beautiful. Yeah. So, so they wore that color. But when Buddhism went to China, only the emperor was allowed to wear a golden or saffron color. Yeah. So the monastics had to change the color of their robes, yeah, to gray. And also in China, because of the culture, well, first of all, in India, in Sri Lanka, and Southeast Asia, it is hot. So having your arms bare, fine, no problem at all. And having the robes be a certain style so that they're cool, no problem at all. But in China, yeah, they thought it was extremely, salacious to show your skin. So the Chinese robes actually became like the court robes from the ancient Chinese court. Yeah, and you'll see Chinese robes, the style very different, but the chugu, the yellow one that we were wearing, there, in all the Buddhist traditions, there's a certain pattern. Everybody follows it, but it looks really different. But if you know what the pattern is, you can see everybody has that. So things had to change, you know. Also, when Buddhism went to China, you had Confucius there, and you had the whole court system and Confucius scholars and Taoist scholars. They were, advisors to the emperor. And the Buddhists, they didn't want the Buddhists coming in and meddling with their power. And the Buddhists, when they were in the cities, it was like, ugh, we get pulled into all this political stuff with the emperor and his whole, court system and everything. And so they didn't want that. So the Buddhist disciples went into the mountains and they started farming to get their food. It was set up initially that you were supposed to get your food by going on alms round. When they went into the mountains, there were no villages to go on alms round to. So, you have in the Chan tradition, which became the Zen tradition in Japan, the thing of growing your own food. Okay? So we had these kinds of different things coming up in the different traditions. And I just realized I've been talking a lot. So, maybe if you have questions or comments, we can do a little Q&A and then we'll take a break. Mm-hmm.
Venerable, one thing I've always wondered about is if the Buddha was omniscient, why he needed to be convinced to teach. Like, couldn't he see for himself that there was just a little dust in beings' eyes?
Because they say that he did that because if you have the gods that the people in the society already worship, and those gods are going to the Buddha and requesting teachings, bowing down and requesting teachings, it's showing it that the Buddha knows and has realized something that those gods haven't. So it's showing that. It's also showing that we have to request teachings. Yeah. The Buddha didn't march out and say, hey, I'm enlightened, follow me. We're going to set up a world religion and I'm going to get elected president and you're going to follow everything I say, aren't you? Yeah, and you can put your money here, lots of it. That's not how things started, okay? For a reason, he was showing the example of, modesty. Yeah. Can you imagine if the Buddha appeared in Times Square? Yeah, what would happen? Yeah. Okay, call CNN, take out your phones. Here's this guy levitating, saying things, rising in the sky. We need to record it. Yeah, take out your phones. Let's interview him. CNN, come on, quickly. Yeah. No, MSNBC, you get the first interview. I mean, yeah, that's the way people react to that kind of thing. So Buddhists do not show that kind of aspect because it just, it produces the wrong state of mind in potential followers. Yeah. So, so there's the tradition of you see the value, you are humble, you request teachings, as it originally happened in many of the Buddhist teaching traditions. You have to request 3 times. Yeah. So you don't just walk in with your credit card and saying, okay, I'm paying you, so give me the teachings that I want. No, I don't like that teaching. That one's too hard. I'll give you some more money. Give me the kind of teaching I like. Yeah? Do you think somebody with that kind of attitude is a qualified disciple? They're a qualified consumer. Yeah. But a person with that kind of attitude, yeah, they're not going to be able to advance spiritually. So that's why. Okay. Other comments, questions? Okay. We'll dedicate. And then think about how the Buddha lived. Yeah. And what his lifestyle was indicating to us. We have to update it a little bit now. If we went out in the town with our bowls on Pindapat, alms round, we have some friends in Shasta in California. When they did that, they had to get a parade permit. Yeah, because the way you go out on alms round is it's followed in a line. Yeah. So their county, they had to get a permit to have a parade to go out with their begging bowls. Yeah. And they had to put out a notice informing the people in town what they were doing so that the people in the town wouldn't freak out and would, maybe give them some food. So they, wrote something up and gave it to all the businesses around them. Yeah. We haven't done that in our town yet. Yeah. Maybe we should try it sometime. But yeah. Okay.
May the spiritual teachers who lead me on the sacred path, and the spiritual friends who practice it, have long life. May I pacify completely all outer and inner hindrances. Grant such inspiration, I pray. May the lives of the venerable spiritual mentors be stable, and their virtuous actions spread in the 10 directions. May the light of Lobsang's teachings dispelling the darkness of the beings in the 3 worlds always increase. Iram Gururana Mandala Niryatayami. Due to this merit, may we soon attain the awakened state of Guru Buddha, that we may be able to liberate all sentient beings from their suffering. May the precious Bodhi not yet born arise and grow. May that born have little time, but increase forevermore.